I'm Richard Watson, and educator at Sabre, Australia and New Zealand. Welcome to our second part of our Shine On with Lumishine series. It's a 6-part series. This is the area we're going to focus on is permanent colour. The first section was looking at the portfolio of all the different colour ranges we've got. Today it's going to be all about permanent colour. We're going to look at how to use it, fashion shades, grey coverage, high lifts, and how to apply, remove, and some formulations. So if you are interested in Lumishine, it's a good idea to go back in Facebook and see the first section, which gives you an overview. And this part will be focusing on permanent colour. All right, there we go. Moving on to the second slide. So RGplex technology, you will have, if you saw the first section of our Shine On with Lumishine, we focused quite a lot on the technology. So I'm not going to talk about this. If you need to go back, and we'll go over that in future as well. But the bottom line is that all of our Lumishine colours, including the permanent, which we're talking about today, has RGplex technology within it. Understanding Lumishine. So Lumishine has a tonal letter system, and what that means is that we have the first letter is the dominant tone and the second letter is the secondary tone. There is a third letter in some colours, and that is a tertiary tone. So the first number obviously is the level, the depth of colour, and the first letter after the number is the primary tone. We also, on all of the boxes and tubes, it has a numbering system as well. So depending on whether you like to use the letters or the numbers, then you can go with either one, and it's great for anyone that's has a preference for either. So we will continue and now have an overview, a look at all the shades. Now I'm going to go into detail about where all these sit on the colour wheel in a bit, and we'll go into detail about which ones will give you great coverage and what you can do, how many levels of lift you can get with each series. So looking at the series as a whole, we have what's called a pre-blended colour range. So there's a natural colour, obviously, which is N or 0.0. And then we have colours that are pre-blended with the natural. So they'll start with an N, but then they'll have their secondary and tertiary tone afterwards. So we have NAs, NWBs, NWs. So that's a set on its own. The naturals, the natural ash, the natural warm beige, and the natural warm. And then we move into the natural gold, the natural red gold, natural copper, natural red violets, and the natural violets. That's another section on its own as well. And then we move into our fashion shades: coppers, red coppers, red reds, red violets, violet violets, and blue ashes. You notice above the red copper and the red and the red violet, they're new. So we'll focus on those as well, because there's some new technology within the Powerhouse Reds, which is what those particular colours are called. Also, at the end of the shade guide, you'll see there, we've got the XL series. XL stands for extra light. They're a high lift colour, but they're a little bit different to maybe a high lift colour that you've used in the past. So we'll talk about those in detail as well. So let's have a look at the colour wheel to see how that's going to work out where each of these colours sit. And for me, I'm a visual person. I think a lot of us hairdressers are. This makes a lot of sense to me, because if we mix our primary colours together, we get a neutral. And when you've got a wheel set up like this, the center of the wheel is the neutral area, the mixture of those three primaries. That's where the natural sits in Lumishine. So if people ask what's the base of Lumishine, it's neutral. It is a neutral base. So it has the combination of the three primaries. And then on that inner ring, the inner ring is where they're the pre-blended colors. So they actually have a combination of natural and their particular tone. So it's neutral mixed with whatever it is. So for an MC, for example, you've got a combination of natural and you've got copper or orange mixed with it. Then you've got the exterior, the outer ring of that color wheel, and that's what we would call the true tone or the vivid colors. They are not neutralized at all. So they are true. So for example, your 0.66 red, that is true red. That's fire engine red. And that, if you wanted to neutralize it, could be mixed with a natural or any of the other pre-blended colors on the inner ring, and that will soften that red. But as it stands sitting on the outside there, they're very intense colors. That's really handy for intense fashion shades, but also for neutralizing. If you've got your blue ashes and your silver blues, you can see they're sitting down in the blue violet section on the outer ring. They have an intense amount of blue pigment with no neutralized tones within them. So they are perfect for removing a lot of that unwanted warmth. Okay, so we're going to go into a bit more of a detailed look at the description. I know there's a lot of information here on this slide, but I'll talk through this about what the particular ranges are. And I've spoken a little bit about them already, but as I said, with the natural, you've got a combination of your red, yellow, and blue. So that creates neutral. So you can intermix those to soften the color, as I was showing earlier on your color wheel. So you can add those to your copper, red, violets, and blues to achieve a more naturally balanced gray coverage. But if you use the natural on its own, it'll give you 100% gray coverage. And that's one of the really important things with using a permanent color. We want to quite often cover gray at the regrowth area. So naturals will do that, that's fine. But some of the others will as well. And that moves us down to the natural ash. So that is a neutralized cool color, but because it still has predominantly natural pigment in there, you can get 100% coverage with the natural ashes. The natural warm beige, it is a warm tone. It's a warm beige. So, you know, that caramel beige, whether it be in blondes or brunettes, beautiful, not too warm, and that will also give you 100% coverage. The natural warm, so the NWs, they are absolutely beautiful. They give you probably a slightly softer warmth than the warm beige, a little bit cooler. I love the natural warms. One of the benefits with those is that they can give you 100% coverage as well. And then we move down into our natural golds. Obviously, there's a warmer tone. It's still neutralized, but it's definitely a lot warmer than the two that I spoke about earlier, the beige and the warm. Now, they are what we call cover gray naturally. So yeah, it's going to cover if it's gentle, soft gray on a low percentage, but once it starts to get a little bit higher percentage, we might need to look into mixing those. We'll go into that a little bit deeper in the next couple of slides about how we can mix them to get coverage on any tone that we want. So, like I said earlier, there's the different categories. Those first four will give you 100% coverage. The natural warm, the natural gold, the natural violet, the natural copper, and the natural red golds, they will give you that natural coverage. And you really need to be adding something to them to give you 100% on 100% grey or 75% grey. Then we move down into our fashion shades. So we've got the copper, red, beautiful, rich, long-lasting tones, violets, and the blue ashes as silver blues. Just a quick note on blue ash and silver blue. The blue ashes are in the permanent range, so that's what we look at today. The silver blues are in the demi-permanent ranges, but they really sit in the same part of the color wheel, so the kind of neutralizing concepts work the same with those. So for permanent, we're looking at blue ash, and they're great for getting rid of the orange, red, yellow, really warm undertones. Okay, so we also have high lifts. Like I said, they were at the end of that shade guide, and they're a little bit different to a high lift that I've used before, because every single color in Lumishine permanent color, actually every color in Lumishine, is mixed 1-to-1. Every single one, even the high lifts. And that's why I think it's a little bit different. Because of that, we can use them in two ways. So I'll talk about the first way, which is a traditional high lift. And, you know, that's what we would use them for probably the majority of the time. We've got an XLN, so that's a neutral base. It's not going to neutralize a lot, so you get a bit of warmth with that. The XLA, that's a blue-green base, and that actually neutralizes really nicely. You'd be using these on level 6s and lighter to get a nice warm blonde with the natural, a neutral blonde with the ash, and then we've got the XLB, and that gives you probably in between the natural and the ash. It's probably not quite as warm as the natural, but you do get warm results, but they're really lovely. Like I said, working on a level 6 and above. Then we've got the XLAA. That's a different beast because it's got so much intense cool pigment, the green and the blue, that you really shouldn't use it on the high levels. If you do, you'll get overtoned results, I guess I'll say. So dark levels with the XLAA, so level 5, level 4 is probably ideal, where you can get as much possible lift without using a bleach and the maximum amount of tonal value. So these work really, really well in dark, coarser hair types as well. The other point that I wanted to make with the high lifts being a 1-to-1 and the fact that we have a 5-volume developer within Lumishine, you can mix your 5-volt developer with the high lifts and use them as a toner. Now, because they are meant to be high lifts, they may give you a little bit of a root lift. So if you're concerned about getting warmth at the roots, for example, in between foils, there's still virgin hair in there, maybe this isn't the way to go, but there are lots of other options for toning within the whole range. Now, when you use this, you would mix it with 1-to-1 with 5-volt, and the timing would be less obviously than you would time with doing it as a high lift. They are fantastic. They're very strong. I've found that because of that lifting ability at the roots, even with 5-volt, I tend to use them on full scalp bleachers with the most incredible results. A combination of the XLA and a little bit of the XLAA can give me those beautiful white silvery blondes. So fantastic, really versatile. The XL series you can use as a high lift or as a toner. So let's move on. Mixing and timing. Well, mixing is easy. It's 1-to-1 for everything, absolutely everything. Excuse me. The timing, if we look at this chart, we'll see with 5-volt, we can use that with our demi-permanent liquids, our demi-permanent creams, but also with our permanent colors. So anything that we make within Lumishine can be mixed with 5-volt. And if you're using it with a permanent color, it will just give you the most gentle possible way to use that permanent color. You'll still get a lot of deposit, but you're really not getting much lift at all. No lift, depending on how fine the hair is. And like I said earlier, if you're using the high lifts, be a little bit careful about that warmth of the root that can create a little bit of root lift. If you are using it with a permanent color as a color balancing objective, then a 5 to 30 minute development time is ideal. And then we move into our classic permanent color developers. And we've got 10-volt, 20-volt, 30-volt, and 40-volt. The really simple way to think about these in terms of how much lift you'll get is just drop the 0 from the number of vols. So 20 volt, for example, will give you 2 levels of lift. Now that's on medium textured hair. If you've got really coarse hair, you may find that it may not get you quite 2 levels of lift. That's why we state that it will give you up to 2 levels of lift with 20 volt, 3 levels of lift with 30 volt. So that rule goes through the same. And if you are using any of the 10 to 40 volume, your classic timing is just 35 minutes. Keep it simple. Now that will do most of the work for you. However, if you are going for grey coverage and you feel like it's quite resistant, 45 minutes is probably the way to go. And 20 volt is really the chosen developer for grey coverage. So most salon applications that are grey coverage regrowths will be 20 volume and timed between 35 and 45 minutes. Some people, 35 minutes is fine. But if you find that you're not getting the coverage you're after, definitely boost that timing up to 45 minutes. The same concept applies with high lifts. If you are trying to get maximum lift and you're using 40 volume, with a high lift, as you can see from this, you can time that for up to 60 minutes, up to an hour. And I really highly recommend doing that because that extra time at the end of your high lift really does help to deposit the neutralizing tone. So 60 minutes for high lifts, 45 minutes for that resistant grey coverage, 35 minutes for everything else. Pretty simple. Okay, let's have a little look at the Powerhouse Reds because they're new and they have slightly different technology to the rest of the Lumishine range. And it's really there to keep that red color in a lot longer than anything else I've used before. So the Powerhouse Reds, they, as with all Lumishine, have the RG-Plex bond building technology in it. But in conjunction with that, they have a J5 fade resistant complex. And that consists of 2 things. A dye. So the dye is actually called P5, and that is a dye that is specifically made to anchor intense, long-lasting color deep into the hair shaft that will give maximum longevity. Then it also has moringa oil and lotus flower. And this helps to resist against the everyday pollution, damage that you may cause through your own doing, whether it's through chlorination, heat styling, or whatever like that. These products are there to stop that UV as well from removing all that beautiful tone. So they really do last a long time, and the longest intense reds I've ever used have been from using the Powerhouse Reds. Okay, so we'll move now on to a little bit more detail about the grey coverage. What sort of percentages are we looking at and which ones are going to give us the best coverage? Now, a caveat to all of this grey coverage information that I'm going to give you now is Lumishine has a specific resistant grey coverage range, and it's called Youth Lock. Now, Youth Lock, we're going to focus on the 24th of March will be our next session, part 3, and that will be on Youth Lock. So if you're following these guidelines and you feel as though you're not getting that really opaque coverage on resistant hair, we have an answer. And it's an extra range within Lumishine that we'll talk about in a couple of weeks' time. So focusing just purely on Lumishine permanent colors now, with our naturals, our natural ash, our natural warm, and our natural warm beige, you can get 100% coverage. If someone is 100%, it will give you excellent coverage. Then we move down to the next range, which is still pre-blended colors, but they don't have that same intensity of pigment and the warmth required to give you that grey coverage on 100%. But if you're working on up to 50%, they're fine. And I would use them just straight with 20 volume and time for that 35 to 45 minutes. Once you start to move up into the 50 to 100% range, that's when you want to be adding in portions of the above section, which was the natural ash, natural warm beige. Around about 25% if you're working on between 50 and 75% grey hair. So to put that into layman's terms, what I would be doing is a mix of, let's say it's 30 grams of natural violet, 10 grams of natural, and that would be on someone that's about 75% white. Once we move up into that 100% white, we'll use the same example, and I would be using 50% natural violet. I'd add in 50% natural, and that would give me great coverage on someone that's 100% white. Then we move down to the fashion shades, and obviously you aren't going to get, they're not made for coverage, they're made for intensity. You could put them on white hair, but you're going to get that flaming kind of color and the longevity won't be there. So once you start to want these types of tone, you really need to add in color. Doesn't matter how much white hair they've got, that's going to give you that benefit. So for example, the natural ash, the natural warm, and the natural warm beige, adding in, depending on what percentage of white they are. That's kind of the rule that I go with those. So if we're 20%, I'd put in 20% of my natural, or the other 3, in with my red, for example. If I'm still going to use the red and she's getting up to more like 50% white, then I would be doing half and half, 50% of my red tone and 50% of my grey coverage colour. Then we move up into the 100%, and that's where, you know, you can't obviously put in 100% grey coverage because then you have no red left. 75% of your mix is going to have to be the coverage colour, because for that small lack of non-coverage, the red is going to pop through anyway. So you will actually get intense red shade, even though you're only using a quarter of the formula. But you really do need that 75% of grey coverage to lock that colour in. Okay, once again, 20 volume, 35 to 45 minute developing time. Right, so we're going to look now at the 3 steps to success. So with Lumishine, we like to keep it simple. We've got 3 steps. Step 1 being consultation. Step 2 being formulation. And step 3 being application. So if you follow a system within the salon, always doing these 3 steps, you really won't have failure. The consultation is super important, and to be honest, I could do a whole day, a whole show on consultation. So I won't go into too much detail with this, and it's something that we can talk about in the future. But in the consultation step, the first step is you want to get a feel for the client, their lifestyle, their needs, their wants, what they do with their hair, all of those sorts of things, the more overarching things about their personality. You need to get a handle on that, as well as the specifics of the hair color. So obviously we need the natural level, the percentage of white hair, their desired results. So they want to go from a level 4 to a level 6. We need to know that. Then we need to know the tone. Also, we need to really have an understanding of the hair itself. So that's where an in-depth analysis of the hair comes in. And that's where you need to find out the texture, porosity, the density, the percentage of white hair, their history, and what they're going to do with it in the future. So I won't go too much into it. As you can see, I'm quite passionate about consultations. If you spend the time if you have a thorough knowledge of how to consult, you'll find that everything else flows and everything else is quite simple after you feel confident with your consultations. Step 2 is the formulation. And we've got a couple of specific formulas here that we can use as some examples. Okay, now I'm not going to go through all of these. Some of these PowerPoint slides have a lot of information on them. And the beauty of these videos is you can pause them, you can take screenshots of them, and you can use these to help you out. But I won't go through all. We'll have a little look at a couple of these examples. So in this step, we want to determine the levels of lift, the deposit, and the tone needed to reach the goal. So we know what she wants. How do we get there? If you have a thorough understanding of the color wheel and the numbering system of your particular brand, Lumishine, that you're using, then this system is pretty simple, because if you do the consultation correctly, you will have worked out what is needed. So let's have a look at the very first one here, where we've got someone with a level 4. That's their virgin hair. She doesn't have any grey hair. She's got no white hair. The desired result, she wants to have a level 6. She wants it to be cool, dark blonde. So we're lifting 2 levels, and she still wants it to be cool. So as we know with our color theory, whenever we lift hair, it becomes warmer. So what we need to do is add in a color that's going to neutralize that warmth as we lift. We don't need anything to help us with gray coverage. So the formula here would be a combination of 6Na, we've got the natural ash, which is very cool, and we're going to mix that with 20 volt. The reason for 20 volume is we're going from a level 4 to a level 6, which is 2 steps, 2 levels, 20 volt. Simple. 35-minute development time, because we're not trying to cover any grey hair. If we use the next person, for example, let's have a look at one of our high lifts. So we've got someone with a natural level 6. So she's perfect for a high lift because she doesn't have grey hair. She's not too dark, and she wants to be as light as possible. A nice natural looking blonde. So what we can do there is mix our XLN and 40 volume, equal parts as always, and we process that up to 60 minutes. I would definitely do 60 minutes personally. And also for that client with the amount of level of lift, being in Australia and New Zealand, probably wanting slightly cooler tones, I would mix a combination of the XLN and the XLA together, or maybe even just the XLA, just from experience, knowing the clients tend to want slightly cooler results. So yeah, for that one, I might mix it up a little bit and go XLA for 60 minutes with 40 volt. Okay, so you can see here there are some great examples, and I've already just thrown a little bit of a spanner in the works to say that I tend to mix them a little bit, and that comes with experience. It comes with knowledge of the clientele as well. We're based in Sydney, and we do find that our clients tend to want the cooler blondes a little more. So this is something that you're going to get a handle on. If you have that basic knowledge, you'll understand as we lift, we create warmth, and I just want to neutralize a bit more. All right. So step 3. Step 3 is applying the color. And really, this is the easy part. If you know your theory, if you can do a consultation, then you've done step 1 and step 2, this formulation step. Generally, people feel is the hardest, but if you've got that basics, you'll fly through this, and then we move into the application. And it's very simple. It's a 1-to-1 mix. We know we process depending on what we're trying to do, between 35 and 60 minutes. It says here we can use a bowl or a brush or an applicator bottle. And the applicator bottles through Lumishine are fantastic if you're doing root stretches and toning at the basin. or any sort of work where you want to apply faster and you're going to emulsify it more, I wouldn't use an applicator bottle on a very small regrowth. That's not practical. So a bowl and brush for regrowth work, but mid-length to ends work, applicator bottles are great and they save you time. Big fan. So we've got the application, which is really, it's always going to be different depending on the technique you're doing. So we've got a couple of examples here. We've got a retouch and a virgin app. If we look at the regrowth at the bottom first, that's very much bread and butter sort of work that we do in the salon. So you would apply your regrowth, taking fine partings, applying it only to the hair that needs to be colored, so the virgin hair. And then you would do another mix, a mix that's made specifically for the ends to do what we would call color balancing. If you were to apply the same color all the way through on virgin hair and then on pre-colored hair, you find that it wouldn't be even. Generally, it would go darker on the ends. So we'll do a permanent color at the roots, and then we could do a combination of permanent and 5-volt through the ends for a shorter time, or we could use one of the demi-permanents in Lumishine through those ends. But you would always find that you would time the roots longer than the ends. We'll go into detail about that particular sort of example when we do the demi-permanent sections, because that I tend to do a lot of, and we'll talk about those. Then we've got the other option of the virgin application. Now, these don't happen as often, and a virgin application, it's super important that you don't apply from roots to tips in the same time, because you will find that you get warmer roots. Sometimes they'll lift more because of the heat at the root area than you do on the ends. So there's an option here where you would apply the roots staying away from the scalp around about, it says here 1.5 inches. That to me is too far a distance. I would be talking about 1.5 centimeters, which is less than an inch. So that's applying to the regrowth, and then you would apply a different formula. Generally, it's going to be lighter and warmer to the ends. There is another way to do that, is that you would apply the ends first, staying off the roots, and then use the same formula, timing for less time, to go in at the roots. So both of those techniques work. It just depends on which way you think is going to work for you on that particular time. Okay. So we've done our 3 steps: consultation, formulation, and application. We've applied our color, our Lumishine permanent color. Now we need to remove it. Client comes to the back basin. We rinse the hair thoroughly, and then we acidify the hair with the K-Pack Professional Cuticle Sealer. This helps to bring it back to the natural state of pH level. And then we will shampoo. So something that's a little bit different with Joico. We have an incredible product, the acidifier, which is called K-Pack Professional Cuticle Sealer. This gets used after all services, whether it be perming or coloring. So you would use the cuticle sealer straight after you've rinsed the hair, and then you start to shampoo. Once you shampoo, you generally only need 1 shampoo after a color, and then you would apply one of your particular conditioners through the mid-lengths to ends. So a really good rule of thumb is you can K-Pack Color Therapy shampoo and conditioner after your cuticle sealer. Leave the color therapy conditioner on for 5 minutes, rinse, and style as desired. Something I think you'll find with Lumishine permanent color is the longevity, the shine, the health of the hair is just second to none. The ease of application and the ease of the whole system itself is really fantastic for salon use. It's time efficient, it's easy to use, but the clients get an incredible result. So thank you for listening. thank you for joining in today. Sorry about the little technical hiccups at the start, but we do have more to come. So this is part 2 of a 6-part series, and on March the 24th, we'll be doing part 3. That's where we're going to focus on youth lock and looking at specifically grey coverage, working on the resistant grey hair formulations. So thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you soon.